Have you lived in New York all your life?
Yes, I have. I left for college, and I've been on tour a lot over the past decade. But I have lived in New York my whole life. I'm really a lifer. That's where I've always been based.
Is New York quite a fruitful place for a lot of the, I guess, idiosyncratic maybe characters that we hear on the record?
Yeah. Some of those characters I met in California. Some of them are friends. Some of them are, complete strangers. Some of them are in Norway. All the characters that you meet on this record are from a very specific period in my life. It was about a month or two long, in between two tours, which was the canceled Purple Mountains tour and a tour that I had booked with Craig Finn, doing an opening set for him. And in that time, I remember I was opening for my friend Lola Kirk in Brooklyn, and they literally gave me a 15-minute time slot, which was so funny. I was like, wow, 15 minutes. And I was getting paid an X amount. And I remember calculating like how much I was making per minute. But I got up there and I just could not play my old songs because so much had changed in my life in such a drastic and immediate way. So it was after that show, I was like, the only way I can go on tour right now is if I write an entirely new catalog to play. And so I did, and that's what we recorded. And then I remember taking those songs on tour and just trying to figure out how to play them every night before I would go on and be like, okay, I think I can play this one tonight,
Were you aware of how much things had changed prior to that moment, or was that the kind of catalyst for that realization?
No, it was like as I was trying to gear up for that show, I ended up doing this. I mean, I do this a lot where if I feel sort of fed up with the music that I'm playing, I ended up writing this. It was almost like a stand-up set. I mean, and at one point it involved an exercise routine, and I had like everyone doing jumping jacks with me, and it felt it was really fun. And I realized like I could kind of get the audience to do anything with me at that point. And so I did sort of a, what do you call it? Just a mambo line around the venue. And Lola said, "What are you doing?" And I have this music blasting behind me that I had triggered just with my phone. And I was like, "I don't know, I'm going through a crisis. Get in line." And, it was at that moment, that I was like, yeah, I can't do this opening for Craig Finn on tour. It's fine to do it at like a hometown Brooklyn show with one of my really good friends, but, for my 15-minute time slot. But I was like, yeah, I think this is fun, but I need to actually write something that I can present every night. Maybe it should be like music.
Would have been an intriguing approach to that support slot.
Well, I ended up doing stuff like that. I was trying to remember, that tour is kind of a blur. I mean, it was a little while ago, but I ended up doing this thing where, how did I even set it up? I did end up like high-fiving everyone in the audience at the very end of my set and like walking through the crowd and leaving my guitar kind of like a drone going. So I always do stuff like that if I can get away with it. There were some venues where it just felt really awkward and I didn't want to put that energy into the room. But I have a tendency to break outside of that mold because I think I get just too stiff inside of the like get up and play your songs every night thing. So I need there to be some element that's kind of weird and that breaks up that routine of someone going to a show and having their drink, hearing the songs, clapping at the end of each song. I think
it becomes very routine.
It does. And if I can have one thing that I can do every night that really changes with all of the surroundings, I think that makes me tick, and it kind of keeps me on my toes. So yeah, I did end up doing, I have to look back and remember like how I even framed that whole kind of bit that I was doing. But it was something. Yeah, so we'll see. It's always something different.
Is that desire to express yourself in different ways, partly coming from the fact that, you know, music isn't the only art form that you kind of are very involved with? Because you're a visual artist as well, right?
I am a visual artist. I did a lot of performance art in college, and I think a lot of my idols blend performance with music. And yeah, I think I was introduced to a lot of work and artists when I was in school that really made me want to do something slightly different. You know, whether it was Yoko Ono or Laurie Anderson, Miranda July, Chris Burden, like a lot of, you know, John Cage, like who, you name it. I think I've always been really interested in those people, but I also came from a very traditional music background in a way. Traditional in some senses, like, you know, get up and play songs, kind of traditional. But I've always felt like that wasn't coming from a totally honest place, because the stuff I'm interested in is really different from that. So there's always been sort of tension for me around how to get up on stage every night and play songs, and I'm sort of always doing it a little bit differently.
So it's like the desire to perform and the desire to write songs, are they coming from quite different places almost?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think, you know, it's interesting. This record was almost out of necessity because I had this job that I had to do that I was already kind of signed up for. So I was like, okay, I'm going on an indie rock music tour, so I'm going to write some songs for that, you know. But I think had I had that same, you know, 2 or 3 weeks booked at an art gallery, I probably would have made something entirely different. That's really the extent of the thought I put into what I was going to do when I went into the studio. I definitely did not think any further than that tour. I didn't really think about releasing it or how it might get received. I mean, it's a pretty personal record in a lot of ways. There's a lot of name checking, you know, I'm like really writing down specific people's names. And that's sort of a funny thing to put out into the world. It's almost diaristic. So yeah, I just wasn't really thinking about that. But now that it's going out there, and I'm getting some really wonderful feedback from total strangers about how much they're relating to this one song that I put out, that it, you know, it talks about very specific people in very specific places, but somehow it's resonating with people, and that's really been a joy to experience. I feel really grateful.
Was that Hard Drive, the song you're referencing?
Yeah, it's just, you know, I just put it out not even a week ago, and I've gotten so many nice messages from strangers saying things like, it was hard for me to get out of bed today, but this song helped me do that, and I'm counting along with you at the end of the song, and just those kinds of messages, like thinking that that song helped people get out of bed in the morning actually really makes me feel so good especially when we're all so isolated. It's like I really feel connected to people in this bizarre way.
How did you get talking to the security guard at the beginning of that song?
She started talking to me. I was there with 2 friends, and this happens to me sometimes when I'm in a certain place in my life. I think like a lot of strangers feel compelled to talk to me a lot. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming. I can be pretty shy. But in this case, I was just at this exhibit, and she saw me looking at this one piece, and we were just in this enough of a close proximity to one another that she said, "Hey, you know, I'd really love to give you an overview on the exhibit." And I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." It's not usually the role of a security guard to do that, and I was intrigued by that, because usually they're like almost like statues, and they're not expected to, or probably, you know, there's a certain code of conduct, I think, and a formality to the role of someone playing security and keeping the place secure. And I felt like she sort of broke down that role a little bit and sort of oops, sorry, that was my USB speaker. I was listening to music. So she sort of broke down that wall and became a tour guide. But it was not an official tour. It was her personal views on art, on feminism, on politics, on spirituality. And this happened to me a lot in this particular moment in my life with that happened with the guy at the end of the seventh ray too. It was almost like a spiritual filibustering or something, but not so. I mean, it was really pleasant. The guy at the end of the seventh ray was much more intense, but she just talked to me for about 10 minutes. It was this sort of monologue about everything she was thinking about. And I thought at once I couldn't really pull myself away because she had already engaged me. I found a lot of what she was saying to be really interesting. And just, she had these very clear opinions about things that it just struck me. I was like, I don't know what brought us together in that moment. And so she just sat there with me and my two friends and told us about the art that was surrounding us, but more really about her, I think. So I love that too, when people present an opinion as though it's going to reflect something about the thing that they're talking about, but really it's really reflecting so much about them and their spirit and the way that they think. And when you open that door, sometimes you just end up in these really unexpected places with people. And you kind of like turn that key, and I'm intrigued by that. It's
interesting what you say there as well, that it's almost like most of what we see in art is like self-projection.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. There's a huge element of that in what she was doing. But I love that she presented it as, let me give you an overview on this. It's like, let me give you this objective, almost clinical synopsis of what you're seeing in front of you. She didn't present it as, let me tell you my deepest thoughts about feminism and about the role of art in our lives. She presented it as an overview, which was a complete false advertising in this really delightful way. And I think that's sort of why I ended up going to that song and titling the record that, because it's, of course, there's nothing about what I'm presenting to you, an overview on anything. It's like, let me take you on this diaristic ride through my life in this moment. It's just completely from my perspective, and there's nothing objective about it. So I like that.
Why do you think it is that people quite often come up and speak to you? Like the way you were saying that people often begin conversations with you instead of the other way around.
I don't know. That happened to me. I was remembering that happened to me in Mexico too. I was there just shortly before the pandemic started. Diego Rivera has this incredible collection of pre-Columbian art. It's in Mexico City. And this guy just, in Spanish, I barely speak a lick of Spanish, just was following me around and pointing at things and saying, speaking really quickly in Spanish, knowing that I couldn't really understand him, just pointing at all these beautiful sculptures and telling me about them. And I could kind of pick out a couple words, but I sort of like nod and say, yeah, okay, thanks. I just kept saying like, gracias. So it happens to me a lot in art museums. I don't know. I think I somehow, it's not always a good thing. Like I have a tendency to attract a lot of, I think I just have a very open and maybe approachable energy, for lack of a better word, which has sometimes led me to meet more nefarious characters. I think I just have this very open energy that people just see me as someone that isn't going to judge them, which I think I hope is true. I think I try to be, I mean, we're all judgmental to a certain extent. And I definitely am trying to become more aware of when I am being judgmental. But I think in general, like I have a pretty open mind to what people have to say. I think I have this curiosity too, from sort of like a writer's perspective of experiencing other people's worldviews, even if they're very, very different from mine, and like kind of getting into their worlds. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. And I think I have this a sort of vulnerability to me too. And I think that's the part that is sort of bittersweet, is like, I think that can lead to a lot of really magical conversations with strangers. And it can also just lead to people being definitely stepping over the line sometimes. I'm also that person that everyone always asks me for directions, even if I'm in a foreign country. And that's I'm always very flattered by that. I'm like, wow, I guess I know, like, I look like someone who knows where they're going. That's great, because I really don't most of the time, unless I'm in New York, and then of course I'm very happy to give directions.
There was another character I wanted to ask about who maybe kind of fits into what we've been speaking about, but I don't think he's on the record. Richard Jasmine.
Oh my gosh, Richard Jasmine. He's on my last record. Oh God. I mean, there's a good example of someone who, you know, once you open up to him, he really stuck with you. I worked at the farmer's market in my neighborhood for many, many years, selling organic produce. And every Sunday, Richard Jasmine, who at the time was 90 years old and up, this was probably went on for about 3 years, would visit me and propose to me every Sunday. Sometimes bringing gifts, including half-eaten croissants from Zabar's, a box of chocolates with one chocolate missing. Sometimes like a half a ham sandwich. You know, just like funny little. He came bearing these snacks that were not very appetizing. And he would talk to me about the opera, and he would talk to me about. He loved this one movie that starred. Was Nixon? He was an actor, right?
Not Nixon. It was the other one.
Reagan.
Reagan. Yeah.
Sorry. I haven't seen this film. Anyway, he would talk to me about this one film that he starred in with this character named Cassandra, and at one point he broke his shoulder, and I made the mistake of giving him my number and saying, you know, if you need anything, you can call me. And then he started calling me all the time and leaving me voicemails, and I thought, you know, he was kind of a mensch, but and like a little annoying, but also harmless and so kind at the end of the day. And of course, it's this 90-year-old man. He wore this yellow sweater that he had masking tape on the collar to keep it together, and he would ride over on his bicycle. He definitely too, like, he lived in a, you know, a fancy high rise too. It's just a very strange character, very charismatic. He would talk to everyone. And then, you know, he would be absolutely unaware of the line that was building behind him of all the people trying to buy produce while he was trying to propose to me. Anyway, I gave him my number at that point, and I did end up giving him some herbs while his shoulder was broken. He had fallen off his bicycle, and he left me all these voicemails, and every time I would get one, I thought, oh God, he's called again. Like, when is he going to give up this act? And then I started saving them. And he would say some occasionally really beautiful things, because I think we developed this rapport where I never responded. So it was almost like he would leave me these messages as if I would never hear them or something. But he was always talking to me. And so there you have that same kind of energy of like, he's talking to me, but he's really maybe talking to himself. The voicemail on the record was the last voicemail that I got from him. On my last record, rather. And I never saw him again, and I think he had passed away. And I haven't had the courage to go to the building to ask the doorman, and it's been several years now. But so I just accepted that he's gone. But, you know, I think I was this character at the market. I was a character for other people too. People called me like lettuce girl. I would always hear little kids walk by and say lettuce girl. And so, you know, I was this lettuce girl on the weekends who, at night was playing shows. And so people would talk to me about my music. And I think he was one of them. And it was just this very sort of provincial relationship, and I look back on it very fondly, and I miss working at the market. I couldn't do the late nights, early mornings anymore. It's
interesting to get a window into someone's life in that way, where you're seeing them at their kind of point of completion, if that makes sense, that they've kind of amassed all this wisdom and experience, and this is the kind of completely distilled version of them in a working away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty beautiful.
It's similar as well on the record in the way that he, you know, would he was very tied to that specific part of your life working at the market. It's similar on the record in the same way that the voices kind of float in and out, and they become characters and they kind of drift in and we hear them for a bit, and then they slip away again and slip out of the mix. Did that part of the record change quite a lot for you in terms of where they rested in it and how long they spoke for and the music that was accompanying them? Or was it always very set in stone and you knew what pieces you were going to kind of slot into the mix?
No, I just, at that time when I was making, and the Richard Jasmine pieces from my record Play Till You Win, and so it kind of felt like when I finished that record, I had that audio clip, and then I had a song called Haley that he followed. And then on this record, the overview record, I wanted to write another Haley song spelled differently about a different Haley, and then also have another song with... I like to have some continuity between records. So I thought it just made sense, too, when I was writing that song, when I was writing Hard Drive. I remembered, I actually have a voice memo of her. I wonder if you can even make it out, because I record these things never intending to use them. I just record them for myself. I was recording everything at that time. I was feeling very unmoored, and I think it sort of grounded me to be writing things down, recording, and yeah, I guess it was just an intuitive decision. She seemed like she fit in there. A lot of that song is sort of found. It's almost like found objects pulled from different moments in my life, and those were things that I had written down in my phone, in my notebook, in the voice memo, and they all sort of got pieced together at a certain point. So it to have something concrete like a voice recording felt appropriate. It was very found feeling to me. And similarly, the drum beat in that song is actually pulled from Josh Kaufman, who produced the record, who helped me bring all these songs manifest them into songs from just words. He pulled the drum beat off of his Instagram feed. Eric Biondo sometimes posts these loops of him playing, and he liked it, and it had just come up that day, so he plugged it into his computer, and the whole song just felt very kind of like a collection of things that we wove together, so it really fit there.
So when it came to the producing process, it was almost like you went in with all, like you said, the kind of parts, and the production process was just assembling them and piecing them together.
I walked in with only words. I didn't have any music. Yeah.
Okay.
I had the song Michelangelo, like I had written, that one was, I had a melody and I had chords for that. Otherwise, it was mostly just words, yeah. We made all the music in that week, and that was just me and Josh, and then whoever we felt like bringing in and whoever was around. Like, I think JT Bates happened to be in town that week, and we pulled him into the studio, and Stuart Bogey was around. Josh's wife, Annie, is an incredible bassist, and took off work one morning to come in, so.
It's interesting that Michelangelo was the one that you had the kind of structure there for, because it doesn't really have a chorus, does it?
I never wrote a chorus for it, and I had played it for some friends, and everyone was like, yeah, you should probably write a chorus. And it felt so forced to arrive at any kind of conclusion for that song, because it's really a song about feeling very incomplete. Which, it's a little bit on the nose. I didn't really do it on purpose. I could never get it to go there. I tried, and it always just felt like it subtracted. So it just ended up being that loop that it is, and having a guitar solo instead of a chorus, I guess. I just liked the melody. I liked singing it. It was hard to derivate from that form for some reason.
Was it almost a testament as well to like the fluidity of the recording process and the fact that it was quite free in a way, and anything could kind of happen when you're going in with the songs in that kind of shape?
Yeah, and a lot of those things, the last I made, the one with Richard Jasmine, and I mean, I walked into the studio completely prepared. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I felt a lot of pressure to make the most of my time and the people that were on it and their time. And this one was completely different. I didn't have it in me to have that very fine-tuned attention to detail that was ultimately kind of draining. I just didn't have it in me that time. So it was way more about, Josh would play some chords out on the piano. He's like, maybe we can build like a bridge out of this. And then whatever he had played ended up being the bridge, and it surprisingly would land back at the verse in a way that somehow worked. And I think that can happen with music. You're not exactly sure why it works. And then you kind of think about it and you look at sort of some of the theory and you're like, oh, here's why it works. I just didn't mean for that to happen necessarily. I think it was a very freeing process just to go in and have this trust that we would find something. And usually you can build a lot out of just a few little pieces.
A lot of this record as well is about almost reconnecting with nature. When you're going into that process, are you almost able to slip into more natural rhythms or melodies? Are you kind of able to almost tap into something innate when you don't have any kind of pre-proposed idea of what you want to do with it musically?
Yeah, I mean, there's just, that's a good question. I think there's something really beautiful about a melody that you've been working on for a long time and you chip away at it and it just is kind of perfect. And yeah, like sometimes beautiful melodies are like sculptures in that way, but then there occasionally you can have, I think, or I can have moments where it is more intuitive and just comes very quickly, and you find a certain momentum and a certain clip to working, and you just have to follow that. And when I'm working with someone else, I do look for sort of a quickness before it sort of loses steam. And actually Hard Drive didn't end up having any melody because it was spoken because I was just looking for a pulse to the lyrics, to the song, and the easiest way for me to do that was to not think about melody for a minute and just find a rhythm and how the phrasing sort of fit into a certain chord structure. And then I tried to put a melody to it, and it, again, similarly, it just didn't feel, it felt very forced. So I was like, well, I guess that this is how it's going to be. And you sort of I listened to the song versus trying to bring it to a different place. I just sort of listened, had arrived sort of naturally, and didn't really question it. And just very, very different from how I've worked in the past. I again, like you saw me fiddle with my sound at the beginning of our conversation. Like I really am a perfectionist, and it can be a really terrific asset, but it can also be a real curse and the source of so much anxiety. And I was battling so much in that moment when we were recording that I just didn't have the energy to have that kind of anxious attachment to perfection. So it had to be something different, which is, I don't think I'll make anything like that again. It'll be something different next time.
Do you feel like that vulnerability you were experiencing during the recording process kind of manifests itself?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't mean for it to, but I had a flu at the time. I was quite depressed. I was also taking care of my friend who was very sick, and just the studio became a bit of a sanctuary for me, but I was still pretty just beat up in general, feeling very exhausted and drained. You're hearing like kind of my reserves. We're tapping into the reserves. There is sort of a rawness to that, I think, that comes through. You can hear it in Michelangelo. There's a couple places where you can hear it in my voice. It's not the syrupy, sweet thing that I was going for on my last record of like really trying to get a perfect tone. It's like actually kind of gravelly and sounds a little worn out. And I guess there's something on Hard Drive that I think people are responding to. And similarly, I think I just had to, come as I was in that moment. In a way, that's a tremendous gift to myself now, because I don't have to strain to try to sing something that's like in a key that's hard for me because I wanted it to be in that key. And I don't have to put on a different face to get on stage and sing something that's about feeling a little bit beat up around the edges and feeling confused about things or where I'm going, because that's what these songs are. So it's actually now in this moment it's just, these are songs that I can sing because I can actually sit inside of them quite comfortably.
It's interesting at the start of that you mentioned the studio. It became a sanctuary for you as a result of all the other things that were going on in your life at that time. Sanctuary is a word for me that almost feels synonymous with the Ramble as well, and what you're kind of building there.
Yeah. So that was the last song that I did. Gosh, yeah. I mean, the Ramble is a sanctuary for me. It's this place in Central Park where when COVID sort of first hit the US, and obviously that was a very difficult thing to be processing, and New York was at that point the epicenter of the world. And there I was just trying to survive that. And for some reason, a lot of people didn't feel safe going outside, but I felt safe going to Central Park. And so I was waking up really early at that time, like at 5 a.m. I would just get up and go to the Ramble and go kind of early season bird watching and just walk for hours. And there were hardly any people there, so it was very quiet. It was sort of eerie, and it was just feeling like birds were sort of taking over, and human existence was really quieting. And in this really eerie way, there were a lot of people dying. So that I was definitely feeling that like lack of human presence, and that sort of, I don't know, a little bit of a cloud over Central Park. It's very close to one of the hospitals that was treating a lot of patients as well. So that specific part of the Ramble, of Central Park, called the Ramble, became a place where I would go and find sort of sanctuary and really just try to turn my gaze towards birds mostly, definitely towards spring sort of starting to emerge. But I've noticed that the more I can observe my natural surroundings, the more my mind can in that place when I'm not actually there. The more I'm dreaming about it, the more I just sort of would throw myself into that atmosphere to try to. It wasn't really necessarily an escape so much as a sanctuary, a place to rest. And the Ramble is a place I could talk about a lot. It's a really interesting place.
So were all the sounds on that song recorded in the Ramble, the actual physical space itself, or the natural samples?
They are. My initial plan for that song, so I'm really obsessed with this artist named Janet Cardiff, and she has an audio guide to this certain part of Central Park, and I've gone on that guide many times where you follow her footsteps and she takes you on this kind of diaristic journey that also collages history and music. And I was thinking about her a lot. I was thinking, okay, I would love to make one of those. I'd love to record a guide. I actually did. I recorded a spoken audio guide with the intention of, you go to New York City and you put yourself in the place where the guide begins, and then you just follow my footsteps and I take you around the Ramble. And in the end, I just decided to take that out and let it be a self-guided tour. I realized, okay, this is a record. This is this is something that someone in the UK is going to hear, and I think it would actually be more enjoyable if I can take them to this place and they can have their own experience of walking through the Ramble with me. And maybe there's a saxophonist there. And there usually is. There's a couple saxophonists, actually. And they don't play quite as beautifully as Doug Wieselman, who plays on the record. But, they are these, almost like these living monuments. They're so dependable. They're really there like every weekend. And yeah, I was thinking also a lot about this video piece that I really like, that has a lot of that found sound. So, but then all the instruments I was actually I was having a lot of health issues at the time when I was making that, and struggling to actually record at that moment. So I wrote to some of my friends. I said, hey, hey, Ben Seriton plays, he played some Rhodes and some harmonium, I think. I said, hey, Ben, is there anything you want to add to this? Do whatever you want. I'll mix it all later. Just enjoy it and do it quickly. Don't let this take up a lot of your time. And I wrote to Michael Coleman and Aaron Roche and, of course, Josh Kaufman with the same direction. I love giving directions like that and seeing what you end up with, or directives, rather, I guess is the better word. I definitely experimented with that a lot live for a little while, where I was either part of an ensemble or at the behind the wheel of an ensemble where you have a set of directives, but everyone's improvising. And I really missed that at that moment, especially because I really missed playing live music and feeling the musicians around me and kind of playing off of each other. So this is in no way a substitute, but it was, I think that's where the impulse came from, to have other people play on it.
It's fascinating as well what you were saying, about how it's a place that you can go to like reconnect with your natural surroundings.
Yeah, in New York City.
Because I was reading as well that you were, I think maybe 7 or 8, and you wrote a play called The Witch of Doom Castle.
Oh my God, where did you read that?
I can't remember, but there seems to be a really fascinating parallel there, because isn't that play about, a woman becomes like misunderstood by society and then has to reconnect with her natural surroundings, which is now something that seems to have kind of happened 30 years down the line.
Oh my God, I've thought about that, and you're absolutely right. I'm at my grandmother's old house right now, and I can go find the playbill.
Wow.
And I did this a lot. I was the oldest of a whole bunch of my sister, my brother, and my cousins. And I would write plays, and we would put them on, and we would charge $2 to come, and all of our parents would pay us to come see our plays.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And I was usually directing and writing. And yeah, The Witch of Doom Castle. Yeah, I mean, as a young child, I think I was definitely trying to figure out my role with all of that. But you kind of already hit the nail on the head in terms of how that manifests. I mean, are you a therapist on the side?
Is someone a little bit clairvoyant about that?
Yeah. It's funny. I think that impulse is not left me. And there's also, I'm reading this book right now called Cassandra Speaks. It's written by the woman who runs the Omega Center, which is sort of a wellness center, I guess, in upstate New York. And she talks a lot about the myth of Cassandra. And of course, this is a myth that I've known about for a long time. And similarly,
I'm unfamiliar with this myth. What exactly is the kind of outline of it? Well,
I'm going to out myself right now too, because I was going to say, when I meet strangers, sometimes they find out my name. They say, "Oh, like Cassandra, the Greek princess," and I'm like, "Yep, that's the one." And then they go. I'm always like, "What version of the story do you know?" And then I inevitably get a different version every single time, which of course, you end up getting to know more about the person and the way that they tell the story, because there is this kind of through line of this Greek myth. But basically, she was a Greek princess who was courted by Apollo, who was in love with her. And this is one story. There are a few other versions, but this is the one that I kind of feel is my version.
The definitive version.
Yeah.
The director's cut.
Yeah. Coming from the Cassandra herself. He falls in love with her. He gives her the gift of clairvoyance. And when she doesn't want to, basically when she doesn't want to sleep with him, he gets really upset and has a fit and then spits in her mouth, which is a curse by which he allows her to keep her clairvoyance. However, no one will believe her. And so here you have this clairvoyant princess. She's really beautiful and well respected. And then suddenly this curse is put on her where she starts predicting things and talking to people about them, especially catastrophe, and no one believes her. So she ends up sort of going mad because she predicts things like the Trojan War and other catastrophes, and unfortunately is driven mad by the fact that she has this gift, but no one will accept it. And, there's this, I don't need to go too deep into this at the moment, but I have thought about that a lot. I think when we think about that myth, we can also think about how a lot of women, I think, feel and have felt for a long time in terms of having their voices be heard. And I think similar to what the security guard is saying at the Met Breuer, we really need women's voices in the balance. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be off balance. And I think Cassandra's myth is a good reminder of that. But it is, of course, very tragic. And so you have this psychology term, which is called the Cassandra Complex, which is that you feel like no one believes you, even though you're seeing a sort of like element of truth around you, and sort of how that can be sort of maddening. That's the Cassandra Complex.
Yeah, you would imagine that could lead to like schizophrenia and stuff. What you're saying there, the idea of the Cassandra Complex.
Yeah, like the hysterical woman, that sort of trope, which I think is another trope that I think we need to sort of let go of. But as long as women's voices are not heard, I think that trope will continue to exist, unfortunately.
Yeah. Were you always going to be called Cassandra?
My mom's name is Sandra.
Okay. And
I was named after her, and it was like kind of like a junior, but at the beginning of my name, I guess. And there was a moment where I think she always wanted to be Cassandra. That she felt like she had sort of gotten there, but not made it quite all the way to that name or something. And so, yeah, that was always going to be my name, I think.
And you were born on Friday the 13th on a full moon.
Yes, I was.
And you have a slightly clairvoyant edge based on plays you've written at 8 years old.
Yeah, based on some of my magnum opus.
Do you still read tarot?
I do, yeah, I do. There was a minute where I had to stop reading because I got very sick, and I really think that I have to kind of work on energetic boundaries because I was working with a lot of people that were dealing with a lot of addiction and heartache and just like very difficult things. And I really have a very empathetic disposition, and I really feel things deeply, especially with other people. And I really sometimes will feel things for other people, I think. And that's something I have to really work on. So I have been a little bit more careful about reading for other people because I have to sort of guard my resources a little bit right now, and until I develop a better, I think anyone who works with people, like whether you're a doctor or a hairdresser or someone who does podcasts, like I think you have to sort of like develop a way to protect that part of yourself.
Yeah, it can be very hard to, like what you're saying there, what you're feeling in that session, for it to not bleed into your wider life and kind of have quite a deeply profound impact upon it.
Yeah, I mean, people who are working in therapy or social work they learn techniques for how to do that. These aren't techniques that we learn in daily life, so we all have our own way of doing it sort of intuitively, but it's something I haven't quite mastered yet.
Would you kind of consider yourself quite a spiritual person, kind of following on from what we've just been speaking about?
I consider myself to be someone who is always very curious and investigating that side of life to varying degrees. And I think my position at this point is that I feel like I have a lot to learn, and a lot of the things that I've experienced in my life thus far are just pushing me to get closer to a certain humility that allows us to exist in a more spiritual realm. That's a hard question to answer, honestly. I don't know how to answer that question. I think I study Buddhism. Like that's something I'm really interested in. But there's something about it it just doesn't feel like necessarily spiritual, but actually just way more practical than that. Way more grounded in the earth and in nature.
Does that kind of tie into a little bit what you sing about on New Bikini? I think, when you're speaking about the water kind of being this healing thing.
Similar to some of the other songs, I'm just letting people talk to me and tell me their views with their best intentions. And also kind of saying, someone said, if you see someone that's blue and you say, like, hey, you should try this. It's very easy to kind of shove that off, or no, what's the expression? I don't know. It's just very easy to be like, yeah, maybe that works for you, but it doesn't work for me. And I think there's a little bit of that in this song, I hope. But there's also a genuine belief that there's a certain healing power in just engaging with the ocean in a certain way. But there's also this sort of skepticism there. That's when, my friend says, hey, get in the water when I'm out in Norway. It cures everything. I'm like, well, it might make me feel better, but it won't bring someone back from the dead. And that's sort of the place that at a certain point in the grieving process or the healing process, there's a lot of frustration and you have to accept that. But similar, like my mom says, hey, go on that trip that you want to go on, like go get in the ocean. And like, well, it won't change this genetic mutation. You can't change your DNA necessarily. I mean, maybe we're figuring out ways to do that. I know that the new vaccine, for example, like is going to your RNA. But there are certain things that are pretty much set in stone. And I'm kind of saying, well, I can't change my DNA, Mom. But she's saying, go ahead, just go to the ocean. And similar, like my friend's really sick and we probably can't fix it by going to the beach, but there's actually a lot of power in soothing certain aspects of the mind and ways that we can do that just by accessing nature. I know that sounds super basic, but I'm experiencing that a lot right now. Like I'm actually taking mineral baths every night and I'm finding it's like really helping with certain health issues that I'm having. And I really did find that when I jumped into the ocean every day, it sort of like gave me this shock to my nervous system. When I was in Norway, I got in the ocean every single morning and it was freezing cold. And there are also a lot of studies. Like if you go to Reykjavik and spend time with people there's just all of the local pools that you can go to, or you go into all the different warm water and cool water. And that's just a big part of the culture there. And I find it is really invigorating.
Yeah. I mean, statistically, people who live beside the ocean live longer, I believe.
Mm-hmm. It's funny.
Is that what you were just saying there? Is that where the line about the mind-body connection comes from as well?
Yeah, I think people who deal with a lot of gut issues we're learning a lot about the gut and how there are a lot of different mind techniques, like people who have cured things like Crohn's disease just through meditation. Of course, that's not everyone, but there are a lot of studies showing that you can actually, by repairing the connection between the mind and the gut, like you can repair a lot of really, really difficult chronic illnesses. But of course, that's not the full story. But, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is that Western medicine does often try to see symptoms and repair them with medications. And sometimes those work great. I mean, antibiotics, for example, have saved many, many lives. From my standpoint, Western medicine really is kind of the alternative medicine to what we've had all along, which is a lot of natural remedies and things. I mean, this is a whole other conversation. There's a whole other podcast. But
it does interest me about mental health, though, how we almost try and treat it like a sprained ankle. Like,
yeah,
when you're given medication, it seems like a very kind of one-sided look at it and not really trying to take in the whole picture, if that makes sense, of what's causing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very complex, and I think we really need to look at mental health with the same importance as everything else. I hope that there will be more of an emphasis on mental health as we move forward. Mental health is so incredibly important, and we don't learn about it in school. I think my doctors have only started asking me things like, did you ever experience trauma as a kid? Whereas that's not something that I think they asked even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And those kinds of things are coming up in a way. I think there's a sort of paradigm shift happening with it. And yeah, I think a lot of things, there are ways that we can treat mental health without medication, with a lot of lifestyle choices and everything too, but it really depends on the case. And medication can be very helpful for some people. We can also become resistant to medication in some really extreme cases. It's absolutely a case-by-case basis. It's very complex.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to what you were saying earlier in regards to the water and the kind of attitude that, it might work for you, but it won't work for me. It's the same thing where we're also specific as individuals that what's going to work for one person is never going to work in exactly the same way or maybe to the same effect for another.
Yeah, it's true. It's really true. But I think there has to be a certain will to wanting it to work and being open to a variety of things. And ultimately, when someone gives us advice, sometimes even if we don't want to hear it, especially if we are in the throes of something like a really deep depression, there's evidence of sort of this inability to even accept a way of changing because the brain is so used to functioning in a certain way, following certain pathways. And so to carve out new ones is incredibly difficult. So it's not just that we're grumpy and we don't want to hear it. It's that it's actually, physically, it's something that has changed in us, and it takes a lot to sort of retrain our minds to really listen to things like that. But I think I'm sort of looking at it as people really try their hardest and to give good advice, whether or not it is. I think I'm sort of touched by people's innate desire to help each other heal. Whether or not they succeed is not really what I'm thinking about in that song. It's just sort of people trying to just relate to one another.